How's it going, everyone? I'm Scott Lewis. I'm a fitness and sports instructor for 4CDTC Meaford with PSP. Today we're going to be going through a full body mobility session. We're going to take a top-down approach. So we're going to be looking at two different mobility pieces for each of the groups that we're going to be working on. So just a quick overview, we'll be working on the wrists, the shoulder, the T-spine, the hips, and the ankles. As far as the equipment that you're going to need today, you'll need a mat, a kettlebell, a lacrosse ball, or some type of hard rubberized ball, and a dowel. Some things that you want to keep in mind while we're doing mobility pieces are that you want your body to be warm before you start doing them, so that way the tissues are nice and pliable and you have less risk of hurting yourself while you're trying to do these. So when is the best time to do these mobility pieces? Really, as soon as your heart rate gets up and your body is warm, you can. Ideally, you'll get your general warm-up first, and then you'll get mobility pieces in prior to, say, a strength training session or a circuit, just in order to make sure that you're getting that full range of motion. So today we're going to be focusing on dynamic movements. So we're going to be actively moving our joints, going through as much comfortable range of motion as we can. And this is kind of contrasting the static stretches. So you can still get extra range of motion from doing static stretching, but today we're going to be doing, for the most part, pieces where we'll be putting our joints through a full range of motion to the best of our ability. So we're going to increase comfortable range of motion about our joints by using these four pieces of equipment that I previously mentioned. As far as the time and the sets, we'll spend about 20 seconds for each set, and we're going to be doing 2 sets, and if we have our 2 limbs, that'll be ×2. Why are we going to be doing this? Because doing mobility can potentially reduce our injuries by making sure that all of our joints that are supposed to be mobile are, and our joints that are supposed to be stable are. So an example is, if we're doing an overhead press, we want the shoulders to be mobile enough so that the arms can come up parallel to the body, because if they can't, then our back is going to try to hyperextend to help us get that implement overhead. Factors that may limit our mobility are using only a partial range of motion. So we'll use that same example of reaching overhead. If we only ever reach out to here and we're not practicing to bring that arm to parallel, then we'll never end up getting that full range of motion in our regular daily routine or in our strength training routines if we're only working out to here. Other factors, tight muscles, so that can come from a number of different reasons, usually prolonged sitting or staying in the position for a little bit too long. Previous injury or scar tissue can affect our comfortable range of motion, as well as misaligned fascia. So a common one for that would be plantar fascia on the bottom of the foot. If that is misaligned, then sometimes we can lose a little bit of range of motion at the ankle or even up into the calves. This particular session, if you're going to follow along from the starting of the wrist exercises to the end of the ankle exercises, shouldn't take more than 20 minutes. Obviously, you can abbreviate this. Say if you only have 50 minutes to get a workout in and you can only allocate 10 minutes to mobility prior to the session, then just pick and choose which ones that you think are going to be most applicable to your workout. So for example, if there isn't any type of exercise that involves you to have mobile wrists, so say, handstand push-ups, or if you've got a wide grip overhead position for, say, snatches, then you won't particularly need to do wrist mobility per se. You may want something like the hip mobility or the shoulder mobility, so you can pick and choose which one of these, number one, work for you, and number two, pertain to your workout. Some contraindications or reasons why you shouldn't participate in the session today may include that you have pain in any one of these joints either before or during the session. So if I go into this and I know I have a lot of shoulder pain and I don't want to put myself into those positions, then I'm going to leave those ones out and skip to the next. Or if while doing something in the session you feel a little bit of pain, just know that you ease up. We always stretch or do mobility to tension, but never pain. And then lastly, if you're already very mobile, so for example, if you have hypermobile joints, say in your wrists, then you won't necessarily need to do wrist mobility exercises. Number one, it's a waste of time, but number two, You don't want to lose any of the strength or stability properties of those joints by doing too much mobility and potentially stretching out ligaments and overstretching muscles. So assuming that we're all warm and ready to go, we're going to move through this list sequentially. Again, there's going to be 2 pieces for each joint that we're going to work on. I'll give you an example from one camera view, and then I will do it for my second set from a different view, just so that you can have the benefit of seeing exactly what's going on here. So for our wrist, we have wrist circles and a wall stretch. For our shoulder, we have a dowel pass-through and a lacrosse ball trigger point. We've got, for our T-spine, flexion and extension, as well as rotation. For our hip, we're going to do a squat and rock and a kettlebell hip smash. And then we've got ankle circles and a plantar smash for our ankles. So we're going to begin with our wrist mobility, in particular wrist circles. You don't need any equipment for this one, so follow along.
So first up, you see we have wrist circles for 20 seconds in each direction. This is a very underrated movement that you have in your mobility toolbox. Doesn't take any equipment at all to do, and it will help your wrists when you have to grab things like dumbbells or barbells and get your wrists moving nice and smoothly. All this motion does is help circulate the synovial fluid, which helps your joints move a little bit more smoothly. So if you're one of those people that gets a grinding sensation in your joints, whether it's your shoulders or your wrists, doing these active motions can help with that. The next wrist mobility piece we have today is the least dynamic of the movements that we have. It's more of a passive stretch. So what you're going to do is you're going to point your fingertips in different directions while you're trying to get your palms as close to the wall as you can. So for this, you don't want to push your range of motion to a point where you're feeling pain, and that would be the case for all the exercises we're doing today. You just want to bring it as close as possible until you feel a little bit of a tension, a little bit of stretch, and then you're going to flip your fingers to face a different direction. So you could potentially put these in 10-second holds and then switch. So you'll see that I'm pointing my fingers down and then up to the insides and then to the outsides. Eventually, I'm going to flip my hands around so the back of my hand is in contact with the wall. This, you'll notice that your wrists are quite a bit more sensitive. So again, go until you feel that slight tension and then move on to the next one after 10 seconds. Next up is our first shoulder mobility piece. So this one's great for any type of exercise that you're going to be doing that involve your shoulders. So an overhead press, a lot of people have trouble getting their arms to parallel with their torso, as I mentioned previously. So for this one, all you're going to do is grasp a dowel outside shoulder width, and you can adjust your grip. So all you need to be is wide enough so that that dowel can pass easily overhead. And again, don't push the range of motion. If it isn't there today, do what you can and then try for a little bit more range the next day. Next up in the shoulder mobility category is some soft tissue release. So this is shoulder trigger point using a lacrosse ball or whatever type of rubberized ball you have. You can either use your hand in order to bring that ball into the joint, or you could use a door frame in order to keep that ball situated as you run it along your muscles. So for this, I'm just looking for that connection point in between my pectorals and my delts, so in between my chest and my shoulder. Any type of area that has a little bit of tightness, I'm just massaging using that lacrosse ball. If you have any postural issues, or if you spend a good amount of time at the computer or watching TV, you may find that your shoulders are internally rotated and your chest is tight. This one is great to help relieve some of that tightness. So for the first T-spine mobility exercise, we have what's called cat-cows, otherwise known as flexion and extension of the spine. You may be familiar with this one from yoga. Also, you can do these as static stretches at the end of a workout if you were to hold it in one position for 20 to 30 seconds. Today, we're just cycling through at our own pace. I tend to add a 1 to 2 second pause in either position before moving on. So for this, all you're going to want to do is look up at the ceiling and push your hips back for the first position, and then tuck your chin into your chest and bring your hips down for the second position. If your range of motion isn't quite there yet, don't force your neck to look up. Just go to where you're comfortable. The idea is that the more you practice this, the better range of motion you've got. So if you're very restricted, don't try to match what I'm doing here. Just do the best you can with what you've got today, and then try to progress week to week. Next, for T-spine mobility, we have what's called a Spiderman. It works your T-spine rotation, so you're going to get a little bit of stretch left to right throughout the back as you do this one, but also you're going to get a nice little stretch in the hip of the side that the foot is coming up on. So for this, you're in a plank-like position to begin. Your foot is coming out to the outside of your hand, and that same side hand goes towards the ceiling, and you can follow that hand with your gaze. After that, you're going to reset and do the same thing on the other side. And again, you can add a little bit of a pause at the top if you'd like. If moving the foot up towards the hands is an issue, or if you feel any degree of discomfort with that, you can go from a kneeling position, so knees just underneath your hips in a tabletop position, and just reach one hand after the other and just exclusively focus on the upper body if the hips again are a concern. Next, we're moving on to hip mobility. So this squat and rock is a great one for practicing comfort in the hole as far as squatting, whether it's a back squat, a goblet squat, any iteration of the squat, because what you're going to do is you're going to descend just as you would if you were under load, and then you can take your elbows, place them inside your knees, and drive them outwards in order to stretch the hip capsules slightly. So this is going to make it a little bit more comfortable on your hips when you are eventually under load, but also the rocking is going to help a little bit with your ankle mobility. As far as setup goes, you can see that my feet are just slightly outside of shoulder width, and that my elbows are indeed on the inside of my knees, just adding a little bit of gentle pressure to the outside, but I'm still keeping my glutes squeezed and my back is relatively neutral as well as my head. Our second hip mobility piece is called a hip flexor trigger point. So again, we're looking to target some of that soft tissue that may feel a little bit tight. And again, this is going to help you with most lower body exercises. In particular, the one that I have in mind is the squat, just because if you are tight in the hips, that will affect your performance. So if those hip flexors are tight and you've done, a lot of core or Roman chair exercises where you are inflaming that hip flexor, you're going to want to massage it every now and again, but obviously you can't foam roll it. So using something like a lacrosse ball or a rounded handle of a kettlebell are perfect options in order to get that done. So from this point, you just see that I'm relaxing my upper body and the leg that I'm working on is straight out. The opposite one is propped up just because I want to have a little bit of pliability throughout my hips right across so that I'm not hurting the tissue. If my opposite leg was extended, it might feel like too much of a stretch as I'm massaging. So as far as the type of pattern that you select, it's going to be based on where you're feeling it. Some people, it might be a more of an acute spot, whereas, all the way up the quad right into the hip flexors might be a little bit sore, so you might have to move that handle around a little bit. You can use a rocking motion left to right or up and down, or you can use a circular motion depending on what you need. At the end of the day, all you should be targeting is areas that are particularly tight. If you place the stimulus on it and you're not feeling any tightness, don't worry about it, move on to the next site. Now we're moving on to ankle mobility. So this is ankle circles, very similar to the wrist circles before. And like the wrist circles, it is very underrated and underutilized because you don't need any equipment to do it. And a lot of people who say that they don't have good ankle mobility simply don't do these basics. So right here, we're just doing active circles in one way, and then we're going to switch the direction, and we're going to do that for both feet there. So all you need to do, if you don't have good balance, you can prop yourself up on something that you can hold. You could also possibly do this position from a laying position. You'll also note that I'm not wearing any shoes just because the sides and the tongue of the shoe could potentially inhibit your range of motion depending on what type of footwear you're using. Obviously, if you're playing something like basketball and you have high tops, the idea is that the high top is going to stabilize your ankle, whereas when you're going into a deep squat, you really want to have that range of motion in the ankle so that you're not cut off. So similar to the ankle circles, we have very specific actions at the ankle, such as dorsiflexion, which is lifting the toes up to the ceiling, plantar flexion, which is contracting your calf muscles and pointing your toes to the ground, and then you have inversion, turning your foot in, and eversion, turning your foot away. So you can put your foot through this active range of motion, just going up and down a couple of times. If you really want to test those smaller muscles out, you can try adding a pause in. So pause after your dorsiflexion, pause after your plantar flexion, inversion, eversion, and so on. Whatever you do on the left side, make sure that you repeat on the right, and just give yourself a test. See if those range of motions seem adequate. If it doesn't feel comfortable, this may be one that you want to work on a little bit more frequently. We're going to end the session off with what's called a plantar smash. So again, you're going to want to use that lacrosse ball or any type of ball that's rigid and won't collapse under your body weight. If you have extremely tight fascia, then this one you aren't going to want to put a whole lot of body weight onto. But if nothing else, this one serves as a great massage tool and can help potential range of motion at the level of the ankle and help the calves do their thing. So sometimes what happens is that fascia gets misaligned, especially if we're constricted by shoes or other footwear throughout the day. It's good to be able to take those off and then massage it with these lacrosse balls. So you can either run from the heel up to the balls of your feet, or you could use the top two balls of your feet and go left and right, really whatever's most comfortable to you. This one should feel like a comfortable massage and not like work once you get going. I have made recommendations as far as time under tension and sets, but at the end of the day, you should do what's comfortable for your body. If you feel like you need more than 20 seconds doing a plantar smash or doing wrist circles in order to get your body performing the way you want it to, then you'll have to make those decisions on your own or with the guidance of PSP at your base. Basically, you don't want to increase mobility to the point where you're hypermobile and unable to stabilize the joints, but you obviously don't want to be restricted and feel overly tight or like your joints are grinding while you're performing exercises. The main idea behind this full body mobility session was just to get you comfortable in a variety of different positions before resistance is added. If you feel comfortable in all of these, then you should be good to go for a full body circuit.
I hope you found today's session useful, and hopefully you carry on one or two of these exercises into your own workouts from here on out. If you had any issues or injuries and you're a Canadian Armed Forces member, please fill out a CF98. Otherwise, have a good day from everyone here at 4CDTC Meaford.